नमस्कार, स्वागत है आप सभी का। मैं हूं आपके साथ प्रीति सिंह और मेरे साथ है मेरी सहयोगी शीतल। P20 सम्मेलन के जरिए पूरी दुनिया भारत के लोकतंत्र के नए मंदिर से रूबरू हो रही है। वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली एंड वन फ्यूचर के लक्ष्यों के साथ P20 सम्मेलन के दौरान भारत अपने सदियों पुराने लोकतांत्रिक इतिहास को दुनिया के सामने रख रहा है। इस सम्मेलन में अलग अलग सत्रों में चर्चा हो रही है। सतत विकास लक्ष्य यानी सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट गोल्स के लिए एजेंडा 2030, उपलब्धियां दर्शाना, प्रगति में क्या तेजी है, उस पर मंथन होना। और इसके बाद हम जो दूसरा सत्र देख रहे हैं उसमें हरित भविष्य के लिए सतत ऊर्जा परिवर्तन पर चर्चा शामिल है। पहले 2 सत्रों पर चर्चा हो चुकी है, तीसरा और चौथा सत्र कल आयोजित होगा। और ये जो सत्र होगा वो जेंडर इक्वालिटी यानी महिला पुरुष समानता को मुख्य धारा में लाने से जुड़ा होगा। महिला विकास से आगे बढ़कर अब महिलाओं के नेतृत्व में विकास पर फोकस होगा। और जो चौथा और आखिरी सत्र होगा वो सार्वजनिक डिजिटल प्लेटफॉर्म के माध्यम से लोगों के जीवन में परिवर्तन पर भी चर्चा की जाएगी।
And we are joined by an esteemed panel of guests. In studio here with us is Mr. Karthik Ganeshan, Fellow and Director, Research Coordination Council on Energy, Environment and Water. We're also joined by Dilip Nigam, he's Advisor to Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, and also by Professor T.C. James, Visiting Fellow RIS. Coming to you, Mr. Ganeshan first. As far as the first session, we'll come to the second session. As far as the first session is concerned, we just heard that consensus has been reached. As far as SDGs is concerned, consensus on common agenda has been reached, and that's good news.
Absolutely. I mean, as the world strives to achieve sustainability through, the climate goals, primarily, the net zero achievement, it's important that, there is consensus on this topic, but consensus which is devoid of the support that is needed from the developed world by virtue of sharing the remaining carbon space and making the necessary resources available to, I think, the developing countries is, perhaps not the best kind of consensus. I think everybody agrees that it's a good thing to have SDGs, but how do we achieve them and how do we promote the achievement of the SDGs across the globe is perhaps something that is still contentious. But again, as with all summits, I think, we have to take away the best message that's coming out of there, and consensus, of course, is a good one to have.
And we have to wait for the details to come.
Of course.
बिल्कुल। और एक तरह से जो सहमति बनी है, इसे लेकर लोकसभा अध्यक्ष ओम बिरला ने जानकारी दी। दिल्ली के यशोभूमि में P20 संसदीय सम्मेलन चल रहा है और सत्र के दौरान लोकसभा अध्यक्ष ओम बिरला ने संयुक्त घोषणा पत्र को स्वीकार किए जाने की घोषणा की।
एक्सेलेंसी, मुझे आपके साथ साझा करते हुए अत्यंत प्रसन्नता हो रही है कि हमारी टीम द्वारा पिछले 2 सप्ताह 14 डेज तक अथक प्रयासों के बाद हम P20 शिखर सम्मेलन के संयुक्त वक्तव्य पर आम सहमति बनाने में सफल हुए हैं। ये सफलता आपके सहयोग एवं समर्थन से संभव हुई है। ये हमारी सामूहिक उपलब्धि है और मैं आप सभी को इसके लिए बधाई देता हूं। आपके सहयोग से संयुक्त वक्तव्यों पर हमारे बीच में आम सहमति इसलिए बन पाई है कि P20 की बैठक में हमने अपने मतभेदों से ऊपर उठकर उन विषयों पर ध्यान केंद्रित किया है जो हमें एकजुट करते हैं। इसलिए मुझे इस सभा की ओर से इस संयुक्त वक्तव्य को सर्वसम्मति से अंकित करने के प्रस्ताव हेतु बहुत प्रसन्नता हो रही है और हम सब के लिए ये गौरव का विषय भी है। संयुक्त वक्तव्य एडॉप्ट करने के बाद हम कल इसे औपचारिक रूप से जारी करेंगे। एक्सेलेंसी, आप सभी को मैं हार्दिक धन्यवाद देता हूं। सब सहमति है? ओके, हम सब आपको हार्दिक धन्यवाद देते हैं और संयुक्त वक्तव्य को एडॉप्ट कर लिया है।
Let's go across to Mr. Dilip Nigam. Mr. Nigam, as we heard the Honorable Speaker announcing that consensus, the P20 countries have reached consensus on a joint statement. Your views?
No, definitely this joint statement is going to help a lot. And I'm sure that this will take renewable energy into the new strides. And we all are looking that, as Mr. Ganeshan said, I'm also looking forward for the statement that what consensus has been made and how truly it is going to be followed by the developed countries, because this has been decided at many forums, not in last few years, but last few decades rather. But how good implementation of those statements and how those good implementation of those consensus takes place and how helpful the developed countries are in that respect, that is going to be seen.
Exactly.
प्रोफेसर टीसी जेम्स, मैं थोड़ा सा आपसे समझना चाहूँ, अगर हम सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट गोल्स की बात करते हैं और एक तरफ हम रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी की बात कर रहे हैं, हम जानते हैं कि ये जितने भी गोल्स हैं वो आपस में किस तरह से इंटरकनेक्टेड हैं, और जब हम रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी को लेकर भारत को हम देखते हैं, उसकी स्थिति को, सिचुएशन को, पोजीशन को देखते हैं, तो एक बड़ा ग्लोबल की प्लेयर नजर आता है। ऐसे में इंडिया कैसे लीड कर सकता है अगर हम ग्रीन एनर्जी की तरफ बात करें तो?
थैंक यू। In fact, all the sustainable development goals, they are interrelated. As the one speaker earlier mentioned about, the issue here is really what are the means to implement them. Whether the developed countries, are they going to fulfill their obligations, which they have to do because they are the people who created more problems for the climate. It creates the carbon, they left the carbon. Now, the responsibility, there was one statement once that it should be per head. He said per head means India will be almost 17%, and we hardly had less than 1% share in the making of this climate, the carbon, this thing. So this is one problem. I mean, the other thing is about finding the means. The other thing is, even during the Paris summit, our Prime Minister made a very, this thing, lifestyle for environment. And that was, in fact, if you go through the G20 summit declaration, leaders declaration, you'll find that that has a prominent place. Because just now we are having unlimited production, unlimited consumption model, from which go to a sustainable model of adequate production, adequate consumption without harming the environment. This is the real means forward, and that India has been leading on this matter.
Karthik, we'll have to wait till tomorrow for the statement to come out. But what would be the aspects that you would be looking at, looking for rather?
Right. So the SDGs are beyond climate, right? SDGs speak to poverty reduction, gender equality. It speaks to equal opportunity for people, notwithstanding what their demographic might be. And in a lot of these things, of course, domestic action is needed. Right? There's access to clean water. So there are certain things that are, of course, inter-country. So Europe agreeing that India must end poverty is fairly easy, right? Exactly. So I would say the key ones that we'll be looking for as far as consensus across countries is concerned is on limiting climate action, this is SDG 13, as well as on SDG 12, for instance, right? Like what Mr. James was talking about, which is, reining in your consumption and production. And that speaks, of course, to India's life mission. And it's important that, this message goes across. And as I said, unless we're able to rein that in, if everybody in India aspires for the same level of production and consumption that we have in the developed world, then there's clearly not enough remaining for the rest of the planet. So I think SDG 13 will, of course, be the most important one. But there are many of them where I think India needs to also address some domestic issues that exist. Like? In the way, for instance, we do have, of course, many segments of our population which still do not achieve the right level of nutrition, for instance, right? There is, I think, provision of PDS which ensures that certain, nutrients are provided, carbohydrates, but, micronutrients, right? How is that being gotten across to kids across the country in rural parts and poorer districts? That's something that India needs to solve. And I think there is cognizance of the problem, but we are a large nation with multiple priorities and it will take us time. But that is, of course, the important thing for us to address, because the demographic dividend that we have is really in all of those children who need to be brought out of poverty, because they are the future. And if we have a population that's not nourished and is able to produce for tomorrow, then obviously we are in a bit of a situation where it's not a dividend, it's a bit of a bane for us.
बिल्कुल कार्तिक, जाहिर तौर पर क्योंकि इतनी बड़ी जनसंख्या, अब दुनिया में सबसे ज़्यादा जनसंख्या भारत की, और वहाँ पर तमाम तरह की चुनौतियाँ भी हैं, और ऐसे में जैसे आपने फूड सिक्योरिटी को लेकर बात की है, इस बात का भी जिक्र करना होगा कि 80 करोड़ लोगों को मुफ्त अनाज उपलब्ध कराया जा रहा है। यानी इन चैलेंजेस से पार पाने की लगातार कोशिश की जा रही है। दिलीप निगम जी, बाकी क्षेत्रों के साथ साथ, क्योंकि इस समय हम ग्रीन एनर्जी पर फोकस कर रहे हैं, जो टारगेट सेट किए हैं भारत ने, उन्हें समय से पहले पूरा किया है। हम ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन मिशन की बात करें या इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस की बात करें, मैं थोड़ा आपके नजरिए से भी समझना चाहूंगी कि जो भारत का विजन इसको लेकर रहा है और साथ ही उस रोड मैप पर जितनी तेजी से भारत काम कर रहा है, वो कैसे दुनिया को दिशा दिखा सकता है?
देखिए, अभी जो हमारी भारत की सरकार है वो रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी डेवलपमेंट को टॉप प्रायोरिटी देती है। और हमारे ऑनरेबल प्राइम मिनिस्टर साहब ने जो COP26 में हमें टारगेट दिया था 500 गीगावाट का 2030 तक करने का, वो हम पूरी तरीके से उस पर काम कर रहे हैं। और अभी तक 186 गीगावाट की टोटल नॉन फॉसिल फ्यूल बेस्ड इंस्टॉलेशन देश में लगाए जा चुके हैं। इसके अतिरिक्त लगभग 132 गीगावाट और दूसरा है जो अभी पाइपलाइन में है। और इस सब को मिला के हम लगभग 350 गीगावाट या तो लगा चुके हैं या हम उस पर काम कर चुके हैं, प्लान कर चुके हैं। तो हमें 500 गीगावाट को 2030 तक करने में मुझे नहीं लगता कि कोई दिक्कत होगी, और हम लोग उस पर पूरी तरीके से काम कर रहे हैं। भारत सरकार ने उसके लिए बहुत से कदम उठाए हुए हैं। मैं उनमें से कुछ पर आपको बताना चाहूंगा कि एक तो हमने पूरी तरीके से 100% अलाउ कर रखा है फॉरेन डायरेक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट, जिससे कि अच्छा इन्वेस्टमेंट अभी देश में आ रहा है रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी के सेक्टर में। उसके अलावा हमने और कुछ अच्छी चीजें कर रखी है, जैसे कि हमने इंटर स्टेट ट्रांसमिशन सिस्टम
following various pathways with a view to achieve our climate objectives. For ages, the Indian way of living has laid emphasis on pursuit of human excellence in complete harmony with the mother nature. It is this harmonious coexistence of the mankind with the mother nature which is amply reflected in our ancient text called Vedas, which literally means words of wisdom, which our great ancestors have left behind for us to follow. I quote an eternally relevant hymn from the Prithvi Sukh, a chant in Sanskrit and a part of the Atharva Ved. It tells, Mata Bhumi Putro Aham Prithivya, which means earth is our mother and we are her children. The hymn underlines the reverence of the mother earth and the obligation of the mankind to take care of her. It also reflects our centuries-old cultural ethos based on the principles of sustainability. Excellencies, the efforts of India under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi have been to adhere to the wisdom inherited from our ancestors and to take our rich legacy forward. The lifestyle for environment, life movement proposed by the Honorable Prime Minister at COP26 is our reaffirmation to the path shown by our ancestors. The vision of life is to live a lifestyle that is in tune with planet Earth and not harmful to her. Excellencies, India has been working steadily to build the ecosystem for sustainable energy transition. This ecosystem consists of three key players: the state, the industry, and the ordinary citizens. All three organs of the state are doing their bit to help bring about this transition. While the legislature and the executive are working as enabler to provide the legislative and policy framework for this transition, the judiciary is ensuring that all stakeholders adhere to their legally defined roles. The industry is acting as a provider for producing clean energy products. The citizens are also responding positively to the cause of clean energy transition by adopting clean energy-based products. Excellencies, despite being at the bottom in terms of per capita emissions, India has set ambitious targets for herself insofar as clean energy transition is concerned. Today, India is well poised to reach the milestones set by it for herself. We have already fulfilled our commitment of meeting 40% of our electricity generation capacity from non-fossil fuels made at COP21 9 years ahead of the target date. Besides, India is working steadfastly to achieve the target of installing 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. Excellencies, the pool of renewable energy in India is steadily expanding. Today, India has the fourth largest installed capacity of renewable energy, fourth largest installed capacity of wind power, and the fifth largest installed capacity of the solar power in the world. We aspire to become a net zero carbon economy by 2070. Excellencies, from Global Solar Alliance to Global Biofuels Alliance, India has all along been pursuing the agenda of sustainable energy transition. Apart from the conventional sources of renewable energy, India is also engaged proactively in preparing the roadmap for promoting emerging sources of renewable energy, such as hydrogen energy. India has already launched her National Green Hydrogen Mission with the aim to emerge as the global hub for production and export of green hydrogen by 2030. Excellency, Indian Parliament has been promoting the cause of sustainable energy transition in India. The two houses of Parliament, through general discussions and discussions on the budgetary proposals of the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, have been contributing immensely towards promotion of sustainable energy transition. Similarly, the Committee on Energy, which is a joint committee of the two houses, has also been helping the government in shaping the general policy and statutory framework for sustainable energy transition through its recommendations. Excellencies, the Parliament of India, along with the Government of India, stands committed to the cause of sustainable energy transition. Before I conclude, I would like to quote the father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi, who said that, and I quote, the earth, the air, the land, and the water are not an inheritance from our forefathers, but on loan from our children, so we have to hand over to them at least as it was handed over to us. Nothing can be more relevant and worth acting upon these words of wisdom of Mahatma Gandhi, Excellencies, in our common pursuit of sustainable use of natural resources. Let us pledge ourselves to follow the path of sustainability shown to us by Mahatma Gandhi. Excellencies, very constructive suggestions have come from honorable delegates of different parliaments here. I think this will go a long way in achieving our common objectives. I thanks. Now I will request Honorable Speaker Om Birla ji to conclude this session.
Excellency, just
subject
30 minutes.
इस विषय पर आप बोलना चाहते हैं स्पीकर?
Yes.
इस विषय पर केवल स्पीकर बोलना चाहते हैं इस विषय पर?
Yeah, on behalf of the speaker.
Only no behalf. We have the speaker and deputy speaker, delegation leader. No member.
No member of parliament?
नहीं, speaker.
Yeah, I have the permission
Only.
from our speaker.
This subject.
Yes,
No.
this subject.
This subject.
Yes, just 30 minutes, 30 seconds. Please. We are in a very democratic forum and I really respect.
So that was the Deputy Chairman, Rajya Sabha. And let's go across to our guests once again. We were talking to Dilip Nigam. Mr. Nigam, you were telling us about how India is endeavoring to meet its clean, renewable energy targets. You may kindly continue.
What I was telling that we are on the right track to achieve our targets, as has been said just now in the preceding conversation in the P20 conference, that we have done enough preparations, and for that government has been very supportive. We have brought many conducive policies so that the private sector investment from India and also from abroad is coming very easily, number one. Number two, all the infrastructural requirement in terms of transmission, in terms of land requirement, in terms of financing, everything is available. So the environment and altogether renewable energy is treated to be a good investment destination globally at present in India. And for that, we are hopeful that it will go. If we see in last 9 years, we have
उपयोगी विचार विमर्श किया। सतत ऊर्जा के माध्यम से ही हम अपनी पृथ्वी के साजे भविष्य को सुरक्षित कर सकते हैं। इस लक्ष्य को ध्यान में रखते हुए हम सभी स्वच्छ ऊर्जा के महत्व को रेखांकित करते हुए यहाँ पर एकत्रित हुए हैं। हमें अपनी भावी पीढ़ियों के भविष्य को सुरक्षित रखने की जरूरत है। हम इस महत्वपूर्ण क्षेत्र में एक दूसरे के अनुभव से सीख लेते हुए अपनी अपनी संसदों को हरित भविष्य पर सार्थक नीतियां बनाने के लिए प्रोत्साहित करेंगे और वहां पर इसकी चर्चा भी करेंगे। आज के विचार विमर्श में आपके बहुमूल्य योगदान के लिए मैं आप सबको धन्यवाद देता हूं। आज शाम को हम संसद में मिलेंगे, जहां महात्मा गांधी जी, जिसका जिक्र सभी स्पीकरों ने किया है, उनको श्रद्धांजलि भी देंगे और वहां पर भारत की कल्चर, आध्यात्मिक संस्कृति की एक झलक भी होगी और हमारा नया संसद भवन भी आपको देखने का अवसर मिलेगा। मैं सभी प्रतिनिधियों से आग्रह करता हूं 7:30 पर सभी माननीय प्रतिनिधि पधारे। आप सबका इस सत्र के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। थैंक यू।
बिरला जो आज दो अहम सत्र हुए हैं उनके बारे में जानकारी देते हुए जाहिर तौर पर इसमें कंसेंसस बना है, सर्वसम्मति बनी है और ये अपने आप में बड़ी बात है, क्योंकि G20 का जो डिक्लेरेशन है उसके बाद अब P20 सम्मेलन इस गहन विचार विमर्श के लिए जो तमाम चर्चा के बिंदु हैं उन पर अपने आप में अहम होता है। और अब जैसा कि लोकसभा अध्यक्ष जानकारी भी दे रहे थे कि तमाम जो रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स हैं वो हमारा लोकतंत्र का मंदिर, जो संसद का नया भवन है, उसे देखने के लिए भी अब रवाना होंगे। अपनी चर्चा को हम आगे बढ़ाते हैं और हमारे साथ दिलीप निगम जी जो अपनी बात पूरी नहीं कर पा रहे थे। दिलीप जी, आपने तमाम बातें बताई हैं जो देश में बड़े कदम लिए जा रहे हैं जब हम ग्रीन एनर्जी पर फोकस करने की बात कहते हैं। इसमें आपने FDI का भी जिक्र किया और एक तरह से देखें तो ये $251 मिलियन जो कि हम थर्ड क्वार्टर की बात करें अगर फाइनेंशियल ईयर 2023 की, तो ये बड़ा FDI है जो इस क्षेत्र में हमारे लिए आया है। यानी हम कह सकते हैं कि दुनिया अब ये बात समझ रही है कि ये एक बड़ा सेक्टर है और भारत इसमें एक लीडिंग रोल अदा कर रहा है।
बिल्कुल सही कहा आपने कि हमारे देश में पिछले 8 साल में करीब $78 बिलियन का इन्वेस्टमेंट रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी सेक्टर में आ चुका है। और एक हमारे यहाँ जो अभी तक के प्रोग्राम में रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी में कमी रही है कि हमारे पास इंडिजीनियस मैन्युफैक्चरिंग नहीं थी। उसके लिए सरकार ने बहुत ही अच्छे कदम उठाए हैं। हम एक बहुत नई स्कीम लाए हैं जिसको कि हम प्रोडक्शन लिंक्ड इंसेंटिव स्कीम कहते हैं और उस स्कीम के माध्यम से हम उम्मीद करते हैं कि 2026 के आखिर तक हमारे पास लगभग 75 गीगावाट का मतलब 75,000 मेगावाट के सोलर मॉड्यूल बनाने की देश में ही क्षमता होगी। और उसकी वजह से अभी तक हमें जो एक पड़ोसी देश के ऊपर पूरी तरह से निर्भर करना पड़ रहा था उसको हम पूरी तरीके से दूर करेंगे और न सिर्फ दूर करेंगे बल्कि हम एक्सपोर्ट भी कर पाएंगे। तो इस तरह से बाकी सभी चीजें, भारतवर्ष एक बहुत बड़ा देश है एंड एज यू नो रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी इज ए वेरी वेरी लैंड इंटेंसिव प्रोपोजिशन। तो वी हैव vast land in our country available. We have very good potential of solar and wind both altogether. We had very good manufacturing base in India, but solar manufacturing was lacking so far. But by 26, we will be having very, very strong footing, very robust manufacturing facilities, and that will help not only India to meet its own requirement, but also to export. Right. So we have altogether very good environment for renewable energy projects to come.
Karthik, you were mentioning the 17 SDG agendas.
So as I was saying, there are 17 SDG agendas, of which possibly about 4 or 5 speak to what is relevant to the rest of the world as well, right? For instance, life under the oceans. So we do have, under the G20, we had a blue economy focus as well, and there was consensus on that because we understand the role of the oceans in mitigating climate change and also the resources it produces. There is, for instance, on clean energy and power and clean energy and access, which means that as we heard from Mr. Nigam, right, countries are interdependent on one another for the access to much of this technology. So how do you enable that? That is also a part of the SDGs. So this one, clean energy, sustainable development overall, which is on climate change, all of these, I guess, speak to global efforts. But sustainable cities, for instance, that is very much a domestic prerogative. राइट, आज हम कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि भारत में कितने सारे लोग अपनी निजी गाड़ियों से शहरों में चलते हैं, पर सस्टेनेबल सिटीज़ का यही है कि ज़्यादातर लोग अपने मेट्रो का यूज़ करें, बसेस की यूज़ करें, ताकि निजी गाड़ियों का नहीं.
Honorable Speaker, the Prime Minister and almost all the delegates and parliamentarians traveling by metro and setting an example.
Correct, that's absolutely there, and this needs to be mainstreamed. क्योंकि आज के टाइम में अगर आप देखेंगे, हमने एक सर्वे की थी कुछ साल पहले जहाँ पे पता चला कि लगभग 55% लोग जो हैं, घर जो हैं, एक गाड़ी के ओनरशिप की आशंका रखते हैं. अगर सबको अपनी अपनी
ईवीज को बढ़ावा दिया जाए,
ईवीज को बढ़ावा देना चाहिए, पर आप देखिए सड़कों में जगह तो इतनी है, चाहे वो ईवी हो या चाहे वो आज के पेट्रोल या डीजल का गाड़ी हो, जगह तो उतनी ही है. तो अगर सबके हाथों में अगर एक गाड़ी आ जाएगी तो आप देखिए ट्रैफिक का क्या हालत होगा, आप एक जगह से दूसरी जगह कैसे जा पाएंगे. और ईवीज को बनाने के लिए भी तो हमें नए यंत्रों की जरूरत है, नए मटेरियल्स की जरूरत है. तो उन सबको हम कहाँ से लाएंगे? जैसे उन्होंने कहा था, PLI स्कीम जो है, सोलर PV पैनल्स का जो प्रोडक्शन होगा वो भारत में ज़्यादातर हो जाएगा, पर बैटरीज जो आ रहे हैं, इलेक्ट्रोलाइजर्स जो ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन के लिए आएंगे, वो सब तो अभी भी ज़्यादातर बाहर पे ही हम डिपेंड कर रहे हैं. तो उनको भी थोड़ा बढ़ावा देना होगा डोमेस्टिकली.
प्रोफेसर जेम्स, क्योंकि आप डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज़ को लेकर बहुत बारीक नज़र रखते हैं, अगर हम दिल्ली डिक्लेरेशन की बात करें तो G20 countries have promised to triple global renewable energy capacity by 2030, which is a significant step, but with challenges. आपको लगता है कि खास तौर से ये जो टारगेट है, हम जब रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी को 2030 तक ट्रिपल करने की बात करते हैं, ये बिना डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज के रोल के और वहाँ पर जो ग्रोथ की डिमांड है उन्हें नज़रअंदाज किए बिना हासिल नहीं किया जा सकता, खासकर अफ्रीकन कंट्रीज हैं. और इसीलिए भारत लगातार आगे आया है कि वो जो और विकासशील देश हैं या अविकसित देश हैं उनकी लगातार मदद करें.
Certainly, India actually has taken a real lead in this matter. You just now mentioned about Africa. India took an important step by getting the African Union into the G20. It was a kind of, in fact, after the opening up of G7 to G20, this is the first major international step to involve the developing countries. That's why India said, repeatedly we have repeated in all the various fora of G20 that India will be leading the South. India will be the voice of the South. And without the South, there cannot be, because how many are the what is called the North or the developed countries? Very limited number. Without the South, the world cannot be transformed, because the Sustainable Development Goals is meant for transform the world. And that means the majority, I would say the brutal majority, is in the South. So they have to be totally involved. And in a very international statements, everyone makes a technology transfer. But during the last 55 years, which I have been following these things, I haven't seen that kind of technology transfer. Because then when the negotiations come, the reply being given is, technology is with the private parties and you have to pay for it. And that is where this developing countries are at a loss. They don't have that much money. That when Sustainable Development Goals, number 17, very clearly mentions about having the means to achieve these Sustainable Development Goals. That includes energy, that includes health, that includes food, that includes almost everything, because SDG is a very, very comprehensive. After a 3-year period of thought process, it was developed. So they have to be there, and the developed countries, it is their responsibility. They have to bear the financial burden to a great extent. India has initiated in the past a couple of projects like $100 million for Africa, etc., etc. So India will take the thing, but India cannot alone do it. It has to come from the more developed, more economically sound countries. Thank you.
Karthik, your take.
I will disagree slightly on one thing, which is on technology transfer, right? While there is, of course, an element of transfer that's needed for certain technologies, going forward, there are still many innovations that are yet to happen. And we see that not all technologies that are developed in the West are equally applicable in the Indian context. तो उन सब का co-development होना चाहिए, जहाँ पे भारत का भी उतना ही भाग हो उसमें. तो भारत के इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं, वेस्टर्न इंस्टीट्यूशन के साथ मिलके, they build a technology that actually works for the South. जैसे कि आप देख लीजिए सोलर पैनल्स. सोलर पैनल्स का डिग्रेडेशन जो है सूरज की किरणों से काफ़ी होता है, और जबकि यहाँ पे टेम्परेचर ज़्यादा है, उसका डिग्रेडेशन और भी होता है. तो वही सोलर पैनल अगर अमेरिका के लिए बनाया जा रहा है, तो इंडिया में वही सोलर पैनल का एफिशिएंसी कम होगा, तो उसी को हम यहाँ लाके नहीं रख सकते. तो वी हैव टू डेवलप दैट
And
डिफरेंटली.
Africa would need a different set.
And Africa is probably more similar. तो हमारे जैसे ये समझ लीजिए किसी ट्रॉपिकल कंट्री है, कंट्रीज हैं ज़्यादातर, ऑफ कोर्स नीचे टेम्परेट जोन्स में भी हैं, पर ज़्यादातर सब सहारन अफ्रीका जो कहलाया जाता है, तो उन सब के लिए भारत के जो रिसर्च इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं, उनको भाग लेना चाहिए इन द ग्लोबल एफर्ट. इंडिया नीड्स टू ब्रिंग टुगेदर the resources from the global north as well as what it can bring to the table and other institutions in the south to be able to co-develop some of these technologies.
Basically, India should bridge the gap.
Major economies should. Again, even here, it's not again India's role, right? There is Russia, there is a Saudi Arabia, which are financially, much better off. And they are also, in some sense, Saudi Arabia is also the developing country in some way.
इसीलिए भारत कहता रहा है वसुधैव कुटुंबकम, one earth, one family, one future, grow together. आज बात करी प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी ने, और कहीं ना कहीं उसका जो बारीक पहलू है वो यही सब है जिन पर हम आज चर्चा कर रहे हैं. दिलीप निगम जी, जब मैंने ये बात कही कि रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी को ग्लोबली 2030 तक ट्रिपल करने पर बात हुई है, तिगुना करने पर बात हुई है दिल्ली डिक्लेरेशन पे, लेकिन जब फॉसिल फ्यूल के यूज को रिड्यूस करने की बात की जाती है, तब हम देखते हैं सबसे ज्यादा हमें कहीं ना कहीं मत विभाजन देखने को मिलता है. सारी कंट्रीज एक साथ एक पैमाने पर नहीं आ पाती. ऐसे में इस पहलू की अगर बात की जाए तो इस पहलू को लेकर कैसे दुनिया आगे बढ़ेगी, क्या होगा?
देखिए, इसमें द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट थिंग इज इकोनॉमिक्स. फ्यू इयर्स बैक द इकोनॉमिक्स ऑफ रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी, स्पेशली द सोलर एनर्जी, वाज नॉट अट्रैक्टिव इनफ, एंड that was the major reason what you are saying that fossil fuel को कम करना होगा. अब आज स्थिति ये है कि हमारी जो टैरिफ्स हैं सोलर के या विंड के, वो कन्वेंशनल सेक्टर से जो बिजली पैदा हो रही है देश में उससे कहीं कम है. बट देयर आर सम टेक्नोलॉजिकल कॉन्स्ट्रेंट्स इन यूजिंग सोलर एनर्जी और विंड एनर्जी, बिकॉज दीज एनर्जीज आर नेचर बेस्ड. And like we all know, solar energy is available only during daytime. Wind energy is also not available all the time. Therefore, they are called intermittent energy sources of energy. So we have to find solutions, some technologies in terms of some storage system, which at present is available. So far the technology is concerned, chemical storage, battery storage are available, but they are very costly at present. And with time, when some technological improvements take place and the technology and economy of scale comes into picture, I'm sure the cost of storage will also come. And we are also working globally. People are working for finding out alternative sources of alternative ways of storage. So once that storage thing is achieved up to the extent as per the requirement, I'm sure that economics of renewable energy and the convenience both will be suitable for the mankind, so that they will not depend so much upon the conventional source of energy. But one more point I want to say, what we were talking about the technology transfer, etc., that it is true that there is difference in developed countries, climatic conditions, and Indian conditions or African conditions. But basic technology, if it has been invented, let's say in Europe or somewhere, then instead of reinventing the wheels, the basic technology should come, and adoption of that technology for a particular country, which every country, I hope at least India is capable of adopting that technology, is there. But I'm sorry to say this thing, that developed countries are not coming forward to transfer the technologies. Rather, through developing countries' market, they want to sell their own technology. That difference has to be overcome by dialogues, and what initially also some speaker had said, that developed countries have to come forward and they have to see this global warming thing as a one unit, one problem, not in terms of their own country alone. So that if bigger market like India, if those technologies can be used, then the carbon emissions can be reduced in a much better way.
Basically, think about the world, as we say. Yeah. As we say, not just about their own interests.
Right. And I think it's also important to see that there are positive implications domestically. भारत के लिए भी कई सारी चीज़ें हैं जो क्लाइमेट चेंज एड्रेस करने से आता है. जैसे कि आप देख लीजिए वायु प्रदूषण. कोयले के जलाने से लगभग 15 प्रदूषण PM 2.5 जो आज के टाइम में इंडिया में है वो कोयले के जलाने से। तो जब 2025 या 2040 में जब कोल का जो भारत का जो घटत होगा कंजम्पशन में या पीकिंग होगा जब भी होगा, तब यह है कि 15-20% तक का जो PM 2.5 उस वहाँ से जो पैदा होता है वो भी कम होगा, जिससे आज के टाइम में कई सारे इलनेसेस हैं, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorders, and our population is actually more susceptible to many of these because of air pollution. In fact, air pollution also has an impact on solar PV generation, in fact. So there is an economic case to act on air pollution, which in turn is produced by the use of fossil fuels. And India is one of those countries which has the highest burden of air pollution. So let's not look at this as something we're doing it only for the West on behalf of consensus. Let's see that we are doing this for us as well. It is economic, but we need to realize that there's value beyond just the price we pay for energy.
Talking of the joint statement, coming back to the consensus bit, I'll go across to Professor T.C. James. Professor T.C. James, once again coming to the joint statement, that is the buzz right now. What to look for in it? I mean, we have to wait till tomorrow.
We have to really wait for tomorrow to really find, but I do believe that it will follow the lines of the leaders' declaration of September 10th, which was agreed by all the G20 countries and the invitees and all that. So that broadly follows these principles which India set at the beginning itself. That is Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, and that is one earth, one family, one future. I mean, all our discussions so far just now, that was about the future. What should be the energy? Because after all, whether it is a sustainable consumption, it has to be sustainable energy production, because without energy, there cannot be, it's not only a question of industrialization, it's a question of even agriculture, even for our minimum nutritional needs, we need energy. So that energy has to be sustainable. So that is one point. The other point, which I am sure they will put is about the basic needs kind of thing, that is the health. The health aspect is very important. Currently, especially after the COVID-19, in all the G20 declarations, one health has found a place. That is because of these zoonotic diseases, which are there very much because of environmental factors and all that. Therefore, the countries are now stressing that the health of environment, health of other living organisms, and health of human beings, they are interlinked. They also will stress a lot about the education, because we keep on talking about the least developed countries and less developed countries and all that. Their education plays an important role, because just now we were talking about technology transfer. Whether a country has the capacity to absorb that technology, that is one of the focus points. To get that capacity, or to empower them to get that thing, there has to be a stress on. So these few aspects will come along with the collective leadership, collective commitments, and other things. That's what I'm sure. Thank you.
And Mr. Nigam, what are you hoping to see in the joint statement?
No, I fully agree with Mr. James that this statement is going to be similar on the lines of what G20 we had seen. Because interestingly, and as we all know, we have been following this news through news, that there was not any difference of opinion in coming to that joint declaration. And therefore, as India has always been, especially in G20, we have always been pro clean energy, renewable energy, etc., green energy. So joint statement is going to be favorable for us. But definitely, as it has been said again and again, that implementation of such joint statement is always a problem. Because I mean, it may not be appropriate to take names of few countries, but there are developed countries who are not ready to compromise on their lifestyle at all.
But it's a changing world, Mr. Nigam. Wouldn't you agree? It's a changing world. You never know.
Sorry?
It's a changing world.
Yes, we hope so. We hope so, and that's the change we are looking forward. So your question, I was going to conclude the same thing, that I look forward this time it will give us better results. And it will be, we all jointly will be able to implement the joint declarations, whether it is P20 joint declaration or G20 joint declaration.
Karthik, as Mr. Nigam pointed out, that it will be favorable if India is hoping.
Sure. And I think, it's important for us to understand, and truly internalize Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, right? Which is that what happens in a different part of the world impacts us in one way or the other, right? Whether it's a war between two countries, whether it's scarcity, whether it is unilateral blockades,
Whether it's a terror attack,
whatever it might be, right? Which means that ultimately we have to see that we have to live within the means of what the earth has afforded us, and that is to be equally shared among all the countries. And I hope that that is the spirit that is truly, reflected in the way the statement comes out. And with the events that have unfolded, whether it is, the recent events in Israel or whether it's in Russia, or for that matter, the climate-related crises in other countries, taking cognizance of that, understanding that this is going to be the norm in the, in sort of like the multipolar world that we are inheriting today. Let's try and see whether the statement addresses some of these challenges, right? And most importantly, if there is a mechanism that is, I guess these statements typically don't put out any of these financial mechanisms, but if there is a hint of such a mechanism that will be put in place for financing and supporting countries so that, they enable others to sort of, achieve sustainability better, then so be it.
और यही बड़ा सवाल भी है कि वो किस तरह से इस घोषणा पत्र में तमाम उन एक्शंस का जिक्र होगा जो किए जाने होंगे आगे। प्रोफेसर टीसी जेम्स, अगर हम दोनों G20 समिट और P20 समिट में बड़ा अंतर समझें तो यहाँ जो अलग अलग देशों के पार्लियामेंट के हेड्स हैं वो कहीं ना कहीं गहन विचार और विमर्श कर रहे हैं अलग अलग विषयों पर। आपकी नज़र में क्या लगता है, हाउ कैन पार्लियामेंट्स हेल्प स्केल अप ग्लोबल एक्शंस to ensure access to affordable and clean energy for all? Parliament का क्या रोल हो सकता है?
The role of Parliament, very simple. The lawmaking. They are the people. They have to decide the things. The other part of government is an executive. Once the parliaments decide this has to be done, then it is for the executive to implement it. That is where. So Parliament is really the forum which should be there. As Mr. Nigam observed, see, in all the G20 different foreign, I was with the T20 and I was also with the C20 for a short while. In all this, I find that the discussions by and large go in a same pattern, and the stress from the developing countries has been a kind of equity, not equality, and equity to all these matters, and their voice should be heard. And this, I am sure, will reflect in the parliamentarians also. So parliamentarians will have to, in fact, in the G20 final declaration, there is one paragraph which is referring to that making the legislative process expedite the legislative process so that they implement these things. So let us also hope that the parliament will give, parliamentarians in all the countries will give a full support and initiate legislative measures so that the executive can implement them. We say high hope from experience, but I hope something may happen because more and more emergency is coming into the world in climate, in various other area also.
दिलीप निगम जी, एक आपसे भी मैं इस पहलू को समझना चाहूंगी, पार्लियामेंट का रोल क्या हो सकता है, और जो कंसिडरेशन के लिए बड़े क्वेश्चंस आज थे उसमें ये भी था कि कैन पार्लियामेंट्स एज एन इंस्टीट्यूशन लीड बाय एग्जांपल एंड ट्रांसफॉर्म देमसेल्व्स इनटू मॉडल ग्रीन इंस्टीट्यूशंस बाय हार्नेसिंग डिजिटल टेक्नोलॉजीज एंड अडॉप्टिंग सस्टेनेबल ग्रीन एनर्जी यूज। इस मामले में भी हम देखें तो भारत की संसद ने भी उदाहरण पेश किया, हमने पेपरलेस संसद को होते देखा है, तो किस तरह के एग्जांपल्स पार्लियामेंट सेट कर सकती है इसके लिए?
देखिए, एक तो बात मैं ये कहना चाहूंगा कि द पार्लियामेंटेरियंस आर रिप्रेजेंटेटिव ऑफ पब्लिक, so sometimes they see the interest of public, but I believe that they should come out of that, they should come above that and think about the nation and ultimately world, because parliamentarians still believe in some free electricity, free ration, and all those things should stop. They have to see that what is good for the country and for the world as such. And ultimately, because just for sake of their existence, if they still believe in all those old things where economy takes a hit, whereas the people are happy, that should be stopped totally, I believe. And it should be very judiciously thought that what form of electricity or energy should be used and at what cost. Whether we want to compromise in our lifestyle or we want to compromise in the lifestyle of our grandchildren, that has to be seen. And parliamentarians have to come out of that, and they should think on the lines of the joint declaration what they sign, but they should also try to implement them.
And that's why the Prime Minister in his inaugural speech, Karthik, rightly pointed out that this is the Mahakumbh of parliamentary practices all over the world.
Right, absolutely. And I think, taking on from what Mr. Nigam has said, it's also difficult to expect the parliamentarians to deliver something that you're not asking for. So I think the most important thing here, while we're talking about the role for parliamentarians, we shape our parliamentarians. We shape them by asking them what is it that we want for a sustainable world. So, and I feel that, limiting our role in just that process of electing our parliamentarians is again limiting what we can achieve, on a big scale with regard to climate action. So being constantly involved with not just our parliamentarians, but also our elected representatives at every level, whether it's our MLAs, whether it's our MLCs,
At
right?
the Gram Sabha level,
And
the
on at the Gram
panchayats.
Sabha level, right? It is very important because it's all those institutions that are actually going to deliver what the parliamentarians are promising at the national level. Because ultimately the onus is on the state, is on the cities, is on the villages to be able to actually action some of them. So I hope, this doesn't, and I think today, while the parliamentarians are certainly aware, they still are limited by, the political cycle that gets spoken of in so many debates. So how do we get them to think beyond that, and how do people then vote for people who think beyond political cycles? And that's something that, I hope, I'm not sure whether it's in the interest of the parliamentarians, but at least it needs to be in the interest of those who are shaping people's opinion as to what to consider when they're actually voting in their parliamentarians.
Right.
प्रोफेसर टीसी जेम्स, एक बार फिर से हम टेक्नोलॉजी की तरफ जाएंगे और जैसा आप लोगों ने बात भी की है, हम तेजी से बढ़ती अर्थव्यवस्था है, जल्दी हम तीसरी सबसे बड़ी इकोनॉमी दुनिया में बनने वाले हैं। ऐसे में ये जो ट्रांजिशन है क्लीन एनर्जी की तरफ, ये कितनी ह्यूज इकोनॉमिक अपॉर्चुनिटी हमारे लिए लेकर आएगा? एक तरफ तो सेफ फ्यूचर भी होगा, दूसरी तरफ एक इकोनॉमिक अपॉर्चुनिटी भी होगी, क्योंकि हम जानते हैं हम ग्लोबल लीडर हैं जब रिन्यूएबल बैटरीज की बात आती है, ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन की बात आती है, हम सोलर और विंड एनर्जी को लेकर किस तरह से लीड कर रहे हैं, हमने सबने देखा है। तो कितनी बड़ी इकोनॉमिक अपॉर्चुनिटी भारत के लिए?
I won't be able to quantify it, but as far as because I don't get too much into that area, but this much I know: in the area of production, India is a leading, and we really have the opportunities to our own economy itself is a large economy, so there will be quite a big need for this new sustainable source of energy for our economy. Second, once we develop, as I forgot mentioned about it, we have capability to absorb technologies and transform those technologies. So that's a big capability we have. In fact, in the matter of solar cells, we have already shown it. So there's a huge market in the world for this kind of new energy sources. So we will definitely be able to tap onto those resources, those opportunities. So both way, within the country as well as outside, we can and we would take a big lead in these things, because already we have, like Solar Alliance, we started long back, and that time it was not so much spoken of, and we are already exceeding the targets we were setting from year to year. That itself shows that India is in the lead, and from whatever minor interactions I have with people from Africa, they are looking forward to India in the matter of sustainable energy sources, particularly solar energy sources.
प्रोफेसर जेम्स, आप भले ही आंकड़े उतने साफ तौर पे ना बता पाए, लेकिन बहुत अच्छे से एक्सप्लेन किया आपने। कार्तिक गणेशन से मैं इस पर समझना चाहूँगी, जब मैंने रिन्यूएबल बैटरीज और ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन की बात की कार्तिक, तो ये माना जा रहा है कि $80 बिलियन इंडिया कहीं ना कहीं क्रिएट कर सकता है, इतना मार्केट बाय 2030।
बिल्कुल।
आपकी नज़र में बताइए इकोनॉमिक अपॉर्चुनिटी कितनी बड़ी होगी? हमने चैलेंजेस की बात की, अब अपॉर्चुनिटी की अगर बात करें।
बिल्कुल, अपॉर्चुनिटी तो बिल्कुल बैटरीज और हाइड्रोजन दोनों में। अगर आप देखेंगे, अगर भारत का लगभग 25% इंपोर्ट जो है आज के टाइम पे क्रूड ऑयल का है, 25% ऑफ आवर इंपोर्ट्स आर क्रूड ऑयल। और ये जो हाइड्रोजन की जो बात हो रही है, ये ज़्यादातर उन चीज़ों को रिप्लेस करेगा। जैसे आप देखेंगे नेचुरल गैस को, जो फर्टिलाइज़र प्रोडक्शन में यूज़ होता है, जो पेट्रोलियम रिफाइनिंग में भी जो नेचुरल गैस हाइड्रोजन पैदा यूज़ होता है, वो भी आज ग्रे हाइड्रोजन है, तो उसको भी रिप्लेस कर सकता है ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन। तो इस वजह से हम देखें तो भारत को हाइड्रोजन को ग्रीन बनाने में बहुत ही बड़ा अपॉर्चुनिटी है, बिकॉज इट इम्पैक्ट्स 25% ऑफ आवर इंपोर्ट बिल टुडे, विच इज़ सिग्निफिकेंट। एंड इफ यू लुक एट स्टोरेज, जैसे निगम साहब ने समझाया हमें, स्टोरेज इज इंपॉर्टेंट बिकॉज सौर ऊर्जा तो पैदा हो जाएगा दिन में, और हवा से जो ऊर्जा पैदा होती है वो रात में होती है। तो इन दोनों को अगर मिला के अगर हम 24 आवर सप्लाई या लगभग 24 आवर राउंड द क्लॉक जो कहा जाता है उसको बनाने के लिए तो बैटरीज की ज़रूरत है। तभी हम सोच पाएंगे कि हम कोयले से दूर तब हो पाएंगे जब पूरा का पूरा सिस्टम जो है या तो सोलर, न्यूक्लियर, हाइड्रो और विंड से चलेगा। और इन सब को चलाने के लिए स्टोरेज की ज़रूरत पड़ेगी। और स्टोरेज का अगर आप देखेंगे ये है कि आज के टाइम में चाइना जो है लगभग 85% जो बैटरीज हैं चाइना में बन रहे हैं। और मामला इतना गंभीर हो चुका है कि आज के टाइम में ओवर कैपेसिटी है चाइना में। तो उस समय अगर भारत आज के टाइम में सोच रहा है कि मुझे कैपेसिटी लाना चाहिए मार्केट में, तो हमारा कुल मिला के इंस्टॉल कैपेसिटी बस 25 गीगावाट आवर होगा, जबकि पूरी दुनिया का समझ लीजिए 1000 से भी ऊपर। तो हमें देखना चाहिए कि हमारी कॉम्पिटिटिवनेस कहाँ रहेगी इस इकोसिस्टम में। तो अपॉर्चुनिटी तो है बहुत सारी चीज़ों में, पर कई चीज़ों में बिल्कुल कई चीज़ों में कई देश आगे जा चुके हैं। तो हमें पहले ये एनालाइज करना होगा कि हमें कौन सी टेक्नोलॉजी के पीछे हमारे रिसोर्सेज लगाने चाहिए। तो हाइड्रोजन इज वन ऑफ देम, which is one of the reasons why even in the G20 hydrogen formed a big part of the agenda. Storage is not limited to only lithium based technology. So I think this is where we have to look at innovation, ताकि आज के टाइम में जो डिपेंडेंसी लिथियम या निकल या मैंगनीज या कोबाल्ट पे है वो कल किसी और मिनरल्स पे हो, मटेरियल्स पे हो। सोडियम आयन हो सकता है, जिसमें अगर भारत लीडरशिप ले सकता है तो हमारे फ्यूचर के लिए वो अच्छा होगा, ताकि हमें एक्सोटिक मटेरियल्स की जरूरत ना पड़े और हमारे देश के अंदर जो मटेरियल्स हैं उन्हीं से हम बैटरीज पैदा कर सकते हैं।
What about African Union's involvement here?
I think, as rightly pointed by one of
they
the other
speakers, resource rich.
They are resource rich. Yeah. And I think India needs to use the soft power that we had, and I think we still continue to, through the 60s and the 70s, whether it was through, bringing them on, educational learning experiences within, or whether it was through, soft power through our culture. I think re-invoking that, because today the only way we can fight back, the hard sort of investment that many other countries take into Africa is possible by demonstrating this long history of relationship that we've had and the trust that they can have in institutions in India which have actually supported their development over the course of the many decades. So in that sense, as rightly pointed out, Africa is certainly looking to India to cater to a lot of its needs, and it's important that we sort of hold them in our crosshairs as we look at them not just as a market but also as potentially, the next growth center, right? The population in Africa is set to explode on account of the rise in sort of affordability of economic status.
We were discussing this in the morning, and one of the guests pointed out that the next half of this century belongs to Africa.
Belongs to Africa. So which means that we have to look at it as the opportunity for Indian companies, but equally, if we can shape the way they consume and they think of it, their resources are there for it to be shared with us.
Right.
And there's a population that we can also tap into for various purposes. Yeah.
और इसी के साथ जो चर्चा का समय है वो यहीं पूरा हो गया है। दिलीप निगम जी आपका, प्रोफेसर टीसी जेम्स आपका और कार्तिक गणेशन, आप तीनों मेहमानों का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए। तो P20 सम्मेलन के जरिए पूरी दुनिया भारत के लोकतंत्र के नए मंदिर से भी रूबरू हो रही है, हम आपको बता दें। और वन अर्थ वन फैमिली वन फ्यूचर के लक्ष्यों के साथ P20 सम्मेलन के दौरान भारत अपने सदियों पुराने लोकतांत्रिक इतिहास को दुनिया के सामने रख रहा है। इसके अलावा जो 4 सत्र हैं, जिनमें से आज 2 महत्वपूर्ण सत्र हुए हैं, उन पर आज विचार विमर्श हुआ है और इसको लेकर डिक्लेरेशन की जो बात कही जा रही है वो भी सर्वसम्मति से हमारे सामने आया है। आगे कल भी 2 महत्वपूर्ण सत्र होंगे और P20 से जुड़ा जो तमाम अपडेट है, इसका जो विश्लेषण है, मंथन है, विचार है, इस पर खास पेशकश लगातार संसद टीवी पर जारी है। फिलहाल मुझे और शीतल को दीजिए इजाजत।